Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in the Discovery Studio for our Fertility Essentials discussion with the woman that needs no introduction, Dr. Helen O'Neill. I will let you introduce Fertility exactly, but Helen created Fertility, which is a science-backed at-home hormone and fertility testing kit. And personally, as someone who has used this as a consumer, it genuinely changed my thoughts on my own future and my reproductive health. So Helen, thank you for joining us today. It really is an honour, and I've wanted to pick your brains for a really long time. So I've been trying to get this interview for personal reasons. Helen, I would love if you could start by just introducing yourself as a reproductive scientist, but also the concept of fertility and why you launched fertility in the first place.
Sure, thank you. There's both a professional and a personal reason for why I launched fertility. I moved to London 17 years ago, and I did a master's in prenatal genetics and fetal medicine, and that was really a catalyst for how fascinating just human biology is. You know, I did a hardcore molecular genetics degree, and moving into something that actually was applied to how a human being forms from two cells, a sperm and an egg, and forms this embryo that creates life is the most spectacular thing to learn about. And following that, I did a PhD, and then I did a postdoc, and I was doing looking at all about stem cell biology and developmental genetics, and then I became a lecturer, and I was lecturing both master's students and medical students in reproductive science and women's health, anything from embryo formation to fertility to women's health conditions. And yet, being an expert in women's health, I had no idea about my own reproductive health, my own health generally, and there's a strange irony about being that expert, about the person who is presenting all of this information to people who are learning about something and feeling like I was ignorant in my own body. And actually, when you work in something you feel so passionately about, you bring those conversations everywhere you go. I would ruin lots of people's nights out because the statistics around women's health, the prevalence of conditions, our falling fertility rates, are things that kind of live with you. They're a little bit harrowing when you have to get up and present this graph that shows that you're born with all the eggs you'll ever have, and that over time it just steadily declines.
That statistic scares me every time. I think it's something we don't really speak about. I never knew about it before I was listening to your lectures or conversations.
Right, and you get to 30 and you think, I'm in free fall. What do I do about this? Maybe I'm one of the ones who's fine. Maybe I'm not. And then really wanting to take all of the information that I've learned and accrued over the last, almost 20 years to say, how can I apply this to something applicable to what we have every day? I find it really frustrating that we have so many logistics for things that are quite redundant in our lives, and yet we haven't built logistics around our health and the things that we need most information, personalized information about sooner.
I love what you say at the beginning there about accessibility, and it's exactly that. Even as a scientist, you weren't able to access your own information. Can you explain exactly what we can test with fertility? Because it's not just your fertility, is it? There's a wealth of other hormonal conditions that we can be testing for, which can really change our trajectory for the future.
Right, so fertility started as a test to determine fertility, but given that 1 in 10 have PCOS, 1 in 10 have endometriosis, about 20% of women have a thyroid issue. There are many different causes, in fact 11 listed causes of female infertility. That was something that I felt needed to be embedded and found out at the very beginning of a journey. You can test somebody's reproductive hormones, whether it's their ovarian reserve markers or their thyroid or their menstrual cycle hormones, and get an idea, but in the absence of a thorough medical history, you're not really going to find out whether somebody is at risk of fibroids, whether somebody has any one of these pathologies. So when we started the test, yes, it was supposed to be a fertility test, but it's grown so much on from being just a test even to being a full end-to-end gynecology service. And that has been such a mission of ours, because when you start something and you build something that you are going to be testing on all your nearest and dearest, the first thing they'll come back to you with is, okay, what do I do now? And about 47% of people had a clinical indicator for needing an ultrasound scan. So I was like, right, we need to offer ultrasounds. A lot of people want to talk to somebody, whether it's to get advice or to speak to a consultant gynecologist. So we were like, right, we need telemedicine services so that people can get answers and really find out. We built on prescriptions, we've built on egg freezing pathways, IVF pathways, because really what menopause prescriptions, HRT, Because really at the end of that, when you get results from something, you don't want to have more questions. And that's what we've worked really hard to do, is to say, you can do a very comprehensive health assessment online. We'll deliver a test to you. You'll do the blood test on the 3rd day of your menstrual cycle, or any day if you're not getting menstrual cycles. And the results, we've spent 5 years coding over 54,000 clinical scenarios to say that there's almost no scenario that exists that we won't have factored in, so that you're getting a really comprehensive report and not getting what we usually get. If you go to a GP or you go to anywhere to get blood results, you'll get your FSH is 15 picomoles per milliliter out of a reference range of 8 to 1,000, and you look for the asterisks. Am I within range or not? And you're like, what does this mean for me? And you doubly have that question of what does this mean for me when you're in any way vulnerable.
Yeah.
And when we're receiving results about our overall health, and when they have implications for our future, especially family forming or fertility, you're going to be even more vulnerable. So we wanted to really break that down. So everything we test, we explain what is this hormone, why do we test it, what it means for you, but moreover what it means in the context of the symptoms you've told us, your menstrual cycle factors, any previous medical history, any previous infections, so that you're getting a really comprehensive, like 6-page report all about you and your life.
I could dive so deep into all the things you've said there, but I'd love to touch on the accuracy of these tests, because I think we have this idea that they're at-home tests, they're not as accurate as those that we're doing in clinic. Is it something like 99% accurate these tests are?
No, these are absolutely concordant. So when we talk about accuracy, the first clinical trial that we did, bearing in mind I'm an associate professor in reproductive and molecular genetics, this was of paramount importance to me, that this was going to be driven by clinical trials and concordant studies. So the gold standard at present is that you go to a clinic and they do a venipuncture draw. That means they take it out of your arm and they take a lot of blood. Given that 30% of women are anemic, there's really no need to take that much blood from us. We need it. So they take a lot of blood to run a bunch of analytes. And that's really down to the fact that when they go into the lab, an analyzer needs to put a needle down in and it needs to get in far enough to get blood. So the first clinical trial we did was a concordant study looking at the relative reliability of just taking capillary blood, so from the finger prick, so 500 microliters blood, and we also tested urine, saliva, dried blood spot, and what was most concordant was capillary. So our lab is the only lab that is validated for capillary blood testing. We're hoping this is going to be taken over by the NHS soon, because it is a waste of blood resources, you know, needing to go to a phlebotomist to take blood when you can take a smaller amount of blood and get the same level of accuracy, is what we've done.
And I love this concept of us answering questions about ourselves in the comfort of our own home without the pressures of, I don't know, practitioners, clinics, listening to what we're saying. Because I think you made a really important point once about this idea that we're not giving the correct information as well. If someone says to you, well, what are you drinking per week? How is your nutrition? Then we can't really get a proper understanding of what our reproductive system is. Can you explain how you go around that at Fertility?
Yeah, so there is a study that says about 70% of information that's given to you by a clinician in a face-to-face appointment is completely lost. It's lost for various reasons. Number one, I mentioned people feeling vulnerable, shy, you're in a different place, you're usually sweating, sitting on your coat, you're finding your way to a place that you didn't know where it was before. But when you are speaking to somebody with an on average 9-minute appointment for a GP at the NHS, you are not going to, there's physically not enough time for them to ask you all of the requisite questions to get to a clinical diagnosis, nor for you to answer all of the requisite questions. And then what it does is it removes the fact that, yes, you may have a symptom, but also your lifestyle might be depending, your mental health, all of these parameters that actually are inextricably linked to our overall health or a symptom or a condition. So being able to answer a health assessment in the comfort of your home, you're not going anywhere, there's nobody judging you, it's an interface that is actually reassuring you, because with every question that we ask, we'll, like for example, sexually transmitted infections. Certain sexually transmitted infections, you may not know you have them, but they can actually cause scar tissue and build up so that your fallopian tubes could be blocked. You may not know this, but it actually matters to our clinical diagnosis, so we ask about it. But if a stranger asks you how many times, or if you've had sexually transmitted infections, most people polish their halo and they would never dream of sleeping with anyone. Same with the drinking and alcohol. You know, you're going to be like, a glass of wine. every 4 weeks. And actually what we've seen is that it's usually a glass of wine that is shaped like a goblet every single night, where they're managing to miraculously get an entire bottle into a glass and still call it a glass. It was one of the interesting things about the health assessment was pre-COVID, we had a certain limit to number of units per week, and we doubled it because so many women they were like, as we go through this lockdown, this slide is slipping up. But we get really honest truth data about sexually transmitted infections, about drug use, alcohol use, vaping, smoking. We published a reproductive report, we do so every year, and one of the statistics was that 7% of women, which is a significant amount, actively trying to conceive. These women are trying everything they can, they're coming to us, are taking recreational drugs. About 14% were drinking way above the national limit, 22% were vaping, and we've just submitted for publication the first study to show that vaping significantly reduces your ovarian reserve markers. So sorry, it's really annoying, but it's true.
Yeah, and that's new information, right? Because we haven't had this information before, it's too novel.
There's no study on it. So even occasional vapors, we saw a reduction. So it gives us the opportunity to meet people and to find data with no judgment. And also we factor that into our health assessment. So we factored a lot into our health assessment. So we know that there's many medical biases when it comes to racial factors, and yet nobody is the same. So we know that if you are a black woman suffering with pelvic pain, I'm going to triage you as much more important because the chances of you having fibroids are higher than if you're Caucasian. If you're a South Asian woman and you have irregular periods or of a certain age, you're going to be triaged for earlier menopause because on average you will go into perimenopause and menopause 4 years earlier. So it's really important taking ethnicity into account when looking at somebody's medical history based on known stats, but that doesn't happen typically.
It takes back to that personalised approach and making sure that it's taking account of all of what we've got going on. And it sounds all doom and gloom. So if we get these reports back and we see something that is alarming or we're worried, what can we do? But equally, if we are just preparing for that journey, what would the pieces of advice be that we can do to support our fertility or optimise our fertility?
I think it's not just about fertility or a fertility journey, and that's really important to know. Irrespective of your desire to have children, we are governed by our reproductive and menstrual hormones. We are governed by hormones in general. They dictate our mood, our weight, our skin, our appetite, our metabolism, our sex drive, our sleep. Like every single facet of our life is governed by our hormones. And yet we walk around with metrics like heart rate variability or how well we slept. We don't have metrics on whether we are completely out of range for some of the most important hormones that keep us going. And we view irregularity in our menstrual cycle as being an inconvenience, and therefore we'll put a bandage over it and take the pill. And these are the medical bandages that are given to us and offered to us. I think understanding first and foremost that irrespective of your life stage or reproductive journeys, even if you've had kids, even if you're nowhere near it, not thinking of it, understanding your hormones and your fertility are very important. But number two, the fact that that information can be so unbelievably powerful and work on our side is something that you should view this as being, that we are incredibly privileged to be able to get information about our bodies now when for forever women have been on the other side of medicine.
Understood.
Yeah.
There's definitely a change now with female health. Once we've got those results back, what are the steps that we can take with fertility or even outside of fertility to take the next stage if we're concerned? Can we speak to consultants? What can you do after you've got the results?
Yeah, I'd like to call it like a clinical chameleon. So we've built on almost every clinical service that you could imagine. Should you require a prescription for anything? I actually tested this out myself. I got a prescription for something and I was really impressed because I called them. I had a call with one of our own doctors. I was like, I'm going to test this process. It's really the cobbler's shoes. You're usually the one who's like dying on your deathbed, helping everyone else's health but your own. But I was able to walk across the street an hour later to the pharmacy, pick up the prescription, and I was like, this is what it should be like, or it would arrived at my house the next morning. This is what healthcare should be like. We have so many accessible logistics around ordering anything we want. We've all been embarrassed at a time when the Amazon person has arrived at your door and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I don't need this. This is the most ridiculous order I've ever made, but it's coming to my house really conveniently. And then you're scurrying away thinking, a van, a human, brought that to my house, and it's something I really don't need right now. And there's logistics around that. And yet, when you have an infection, when you're painfully bleeding every single month, when you're getting all of this dire aspects of women's health that we can all face, and you have nowhere to turn but the web, which, it doesn't actually serve you any answers, it serves you more questions, then that's really not where we should be. We should be able to look and find answers. And actually that's something that I know that the traffic on that for the health assessment on our website is highest between 9, 10 p.m. and 1 in the morning.
Wow.
And that is because that is the one time we are not serving somebody else's needs, our kids, our partners, work. Anything else is getting what they need at any one point in the day. But it's when we lie back and are alone with our own fears and our wonders and our questions and our worries, and we say, actually, maybe I can look this up. Yeah. And that's one thing I always think, thank God, whoever she is, we've been able to provide that light in the dark for somebody who's really struggling.
At what age and stage do you recommend that we start looking into this? You said it's not just about fertility, but also hormones. And how often should we be testing? Is this something that we should be doing every year? Should we be keeping an eye on it?
I want to get to the stage where everyone tracks their ovaries over their calories. I think everyone should know their rate of ovarian reserve decline. Our lives as women are punctuated by these seismic hormonal events that we know are going to happen, right? When we describe a teenager, you describe them as spotty, hormonal, aggressive, moody. You're never expecting them to stay like that, but you know that their life has been hit by hormones for the first time, and it's going to make a big difference to them. And yet, when we go through perimenopause, when we go postpartum, these are huge hormonal changes that we know we're hitting into a big change that's going to affect you in many ways, mentally, physically. And yet, nobody's given a seatbelt or told to prepare for it. We blithely go through life and are anticipating a change, or we'll blame or accuse or weaponize hormones to say someone's hormonal, but we don't prepare women, educate them, and prepare ourselves to say, actually, I know what's going to happen, but I'm not going to let myself be derailed.
So true.
So yeah, from 18. I would love to say younger, but we legally can't test you if you're under 18.
Amen to ovaries over calories.
Ovaries over calories.
That's brilliant. And for those that are embarking upon a fertility journey, I would love to touch on the concept that we often feel shame as women. I think that we have a lot of responsibility when it comes to that part of making that next stage of life. The men have a part to play in this too, don't they? And I think this is something that you've spoken on before, is understanding that you don't need to feel that shame when you're entering that journey. Could you just touch on the importance of your male partner's fertility health as well?
There is very little that they need to do, ever, in this journey. But they do contribute 50% of the DNA. So even though the egg is the largest cell in the body and the sperm is the smallest cell, just saying, there's one XY chromosome that I can make eye contact with while I say that. Well, that's true. It may be tiny, but it does contribute 50% of the DNA. And what's amazing is when I see these women who come to me and they've got their kale smoothies and they're doing acupuncture and they're doing yoga and they're cutting everything out on this fertility journey, and their partner is doing anything, they're on ketamine smoothies and they're doing whatever they want. Because they're the party guy. They just show up and donate their piece.
That's what they need to do.
Exactly. But actually, when I mentioned that harrowing graph, which was probably the thing that scared me into starting fertility, which shows your ovarian reserve declining over time, that is the sad truth, is that we are born with all the eggs we'll ever have, and they will decline over time. And that is true of the egg quality to a certain extent, in that there's not a lot we can do for our egg quality. Yes, we can really look after our preconception health, but actually sperm have a life cycle of 3 months. So the spermatogenic stem cells regenerate every 3 months, and you have a huge opportunity as a man to increase all of the parameters of health, whether it's the number, concentration, the motility. So we know that sperm will move, but we need it to be progressively motile. So all of these parameters, progressive motility, sperm concentration, DNA fragmentation, all of them can be dramatically increased and improved through removing trans fats, not smoking, not drinking. And you only need to do it for 3 months, and you are not going to just improve the chances of getting pregnant. You're going to increase the health of your baby, increase the health of the pregnancy, postpartum. All of these different things can be done for a 3-month sacrifice. So it is very worthwhile going home and starting a fight.
Take note, take note. Just before we finish, I know we're pushing it for time, I would love to chat on 3 pieces of advice that you would give us to optimise our hormones and our fertility. And also, as a trailblazer in this industry, what is next for reproductive and hormone health?
Okay, 3 pieces of advice. Probably number 1 is what we eat. What we eat is such a, it seems so trivial and simple, but when it comes to your hormones, so many of our hormones are actually modulated by what we eat. And the diversity of our guts. So estrogen, which is the most powerful queen we have, she governs so much of our lives, not just our reproductive cycles, but our skin. It's linked to your collagen, our bone density. It's linked to our cardiovascular health. In fact, when we lose estrogen as we go through perimenopause, that is responsible for the top 3 killers in women. That is cardiovascular, our bone density, so women break bones when they lose their estrogen, and our neurocognitive. We have twice the number of estrogen receptors in our brain. But estrogen is deconjugated in the bowel and in the gut, and it's deconjugated when you have a proper diversity of gut bacteria. And when you don't, it doesn't deconjugate and you get porosity into your bowel and you really just don't break it down. So number 1, look after your hormones through your diet. And that is really getting good gut diversity. Number 2 is about understanding where in your menstrual cycle you are, or where in your reproductive life you are. Where is your estrogen today? Yep. If you're ovulating, you are going to be on top of the world. If you're in your luteal phase, just give yourself some grace, because it's not going to be on your side, and you're more than likely going to be angry at somebody or yourself. And then the 3rd is use the information that you have to educate others. I think we can all be advocates for one another. I remember giving a talk on the importance of hormone health, and a man got up and he said, I have 2 teenage daughters and a clearly perimenopausal wife. This would have been the catalogue to my life over the last few years if I had known this. I'm ashamed to say I didn't know it. I think we should all be allies to one another and just know about the importance of hormones. There are many other things and signals and noise that we allow in that we should block out.
That's so beautiful. I love that piece on education. Helen, thank you so much. It's been an honour to speak to you today, and I hope that you've all got some really valuable information from that. I think Helen will be hanging around for a few moments if anyone has any questions, because we have overrun, otherwise I would do a Q&A. But yes, thank you so much. And yeah, I advocate for fertility as someone who's tried it as a consumer, so definitely get to know yourself. And thank you, Helen. Thanks. Everyone.